It's 2023 and we're not even a month into the year. Nintendo comes out swinging with the release of Fire Emblem Engage. Now, Fire Emblem is a series that is notorious for being either loved or hated, just based on a really steep learning curve and being a very unforgiving game. And Engage stays true to this, accidentally placing a healer in the wrong spot, watching him get destroyed, and now you need to find a new healer for the rest of the game. But does this steep learning curve make it a bad game? No, not at all. This game actually is a really solid game, and I'm going to just save you some time and say, if you're a Fire Emblem fan or a tactical RPG fan, buy this game. But if you'd like to find out what my thought process was as to why this is a good game, stick around for the rest of the video. Now, in traditional Fire Emblem fashion, the story doesn't really do anything new for us. It's your traditional, there's a darkness returning, you're the only one that can save us, here's a couple of people to help you out, assemble an army, and go defeat the darkness. Nothing really new and creative, but it's nothing wrong with it. It's a very solid story. This time around, we're following the story of Alir, the child of the divine dragon, which is the good dragons, not the bad dragons. Those are the failed dragons. We don't like them. And I'm just going to be very blunt about it. The character in the very beginning of the game they're really, really annoying. They're very reminiscent of Tidus from Final Fantasy X. But as you do progress through the story, Alir kind of grows on you. Still oblivious of the world, but in a cute way, not an annoying way.
The divine dragon is finally awake!
Hey, hold on.
Now, along with Alir, you set out on your journey with 3 of your own retainers, as well as a noble and their retainers. Your mission? To gather up all 12 Emblem rings and unite them so that way you can defeat the darkness. Emblem rings are essentially rings that have what I can only describe as souls of past Fire Emblem heroes trapped inside of them, and you summon them forth to use their powers. Now, the game doesn't really explain where these emblem rings came from. They just kind of say they've been there and we've used their power for a millennia type of thing. It's really annoying not actually knowing how they're there, but hey, this is Nintendo. Now, you may be wondering how exactly you're going to collect all 12 rings. And that is with a world map, which is how this game's interface decided to take place. Gone are the days of monastery life and teaching our students, and instead Nintendo has decided to throw us back to a gameplay style similar to that of Fire Emblem Awakening. You now move from blip to blip on an overworld map, unlocking new paths as you progress through the story. You still have your base of operations, and in this game it would be the Somniel, which is the location where you've slept for 1,000 years. You can explore the Somniel in a similar fashion that you could explore the monastery in 3 houses. And as you progress through the story, new facilities such as item shops and weapon smithies will unlock so you can interact with them and upgrade your equipment or buy stuff. Your team members also hang out here when they're not getting ready for battle, and you can interact with them, but the whole social aspect has kind of been dumbed down and taken away from 3 houses. Basically, you get 2 interactions with your party members, and that is either to give them a gift to raise your bond level, or once you hit a bond milestone, you can then interact with them and view this to unlock the next level. Aside from that, there's not much to do at the Somniel besides interacting with the different facilities that unlock as you progress through the game. These facilities, as I mentioned, range from different shops, different smithies to upgrade items, but there is also a few other ones like a training course, which will give you a buff for the next battle. There is your ring chamber where you can interact with your emblem rings and you can create bond rings, which are like emblem rings, but they don't have an actual engage mechanic built into them. They just give you stat bonuses for wearing them. There's also an arena where you can send one of your members out to fight, and if they win, they gain a lot of experience, as well as bond increase between them and their opponent. Or if they lose, they still gain some experience and some bond increase between them and their opponent. And my favorite facility is the cafe, where a random party member is chosen to be the cook, and you can choose 2 people to have a lunch with. Sometimes they like the food, sometimes they do not. Really, all this does is it increases your bond level between yourself and the 2 people you took if they like the food. And you also have a chance to have leftover food by whoever cooked it, which can then in turn be used in battle to restore health. The base overall itself looks pretty cool. But it might just be my old man hands, but I actually don't really like exploring Somniel. And that's specifically because it feels very clunky when you're actually running around and feels very unresponsive. I have no idea why, but I just constantly run into walls. But that's enough about our base. Let's talk about the bread and butter of this game, the combat. The most important thing to note about Engage is that the weapon triangle is back. And for those that don't know what the weapon triangle is, it's essentially rock, paper, scissors, which is axe beats lances, lances beats swords, swords beats axes. But it's done in a little bit of a different way than usual. Instead of just dealing massive damage to somebody that you win against, you now apply what's known as a break status to that person. So if you attack somebody, say for instance you using axes and they have lances, you will apply a break, unless they are the armored class, which is something more in depth. But what break does is basically once you attack them, until their next combat phase, they cannot attack you back. Now this is huge, especially on harder difficulties and in later levels where people run around with killer weapons, which if you're unfamiliar with killer weapons, it's essentially a critical hit every time, which means death if you're on the receiving end of one of those hits. Now besides that, the weapon triangle doesn't really seem to deal extra damage if you actually beat the person, it just applies the break effect. So I kinda missed that from past Fire Emblem games, but at least it's something, because honestly not having the triangle system in Three Houses made it kind of easy. You just had one person that was overpowered and would run ahead and just decimate the entire enemy team. I don't know, I just found it a lot easier in Three Houses, so I'm very, very glad that this is back in the game. Now, aside from the weapon triangle being back, there are a few other changes that were made to combat in Engage. Most noticeable but not really impactful is the fact that now when you select your unit to move them on your turn, instead of drawing an arrow path to designate where they're going to go, you actually freely control where they're going to go. Doesn't really affect anything, it's just kind of a cool little thing. One thing to note is if you try to move past a tile to another tile, and if you can't move through one of the tiles, it will then revert back to the old traditional arrow system until you actually select for them to move to that tile. It's kind of weird, because then when you do that, you have to double confirm that you want to move there. I'm not sure why it's like that, it just is. It's kind of annoying when you mess up, but I mean, hey, it's movement. You draw an arrow where you want someone to go. It's not really that complicated. Another new feature in Engage is class battle styles. Now what this does is each class essentially falls within a bucket of battle style, which can range from cavalry to mystical to backup and so on and so forth, the list goes on. What this does is this gives it an additional effect on the battlefield. This feature kind of adds a whole new complexity to the battle system. For instance, if there's a lot of cover, you definitely want to have more mystical people on your team as they ignore cover. You also potentially want to send one of your backup units a little bit ahead of everybody else, get them set up, and when you start attacking with other units that are within the range of the backup unit will also deal additional damage, which those few points of damage can actually decide if a unit lives or dies. Now, besides these additions and features, the biggest addition to this game is the engage mechanic. Now, the quickest way to break this down is if somebody has an emblem ring equipped, they can enter engage mode, which is essentially going Super Saiyan for 3 turns. Now, during this time period, you'll have access to a bunch of passive effects as well as an emblem weapon, which is generally better than what you currently have equipped. You also change form a little bit, and you also get access to a one-time use per battle emblem skill. Now, these skills vary from emblem to emblem, but normally they're a pretty badass move. Marth, for instance, goes apeshit and hits the person 9 times with reduced damage, but still it's normally enough to kind of one-shot lower level enemies. I haven't run into anything that's actually game breaking, but one thing to note is that these are all super flashy moves and they're fantastic to watch. And speaking of flashy, I just have to point out that flashy critical hits are back on the menu. This is exciting. They look fantastic.
Ready yourself! I cannot afford to lose.
Now, aside from critical hits, the rest of the game looks solid. I actually cannot see any improvements from Three Houses, even though it's built on the Unity engine and not the Dynasty Warriors engine like Houses was. But that's not to say it's a bad thing. I mean, the Switch is, a couple years old. The hardware is kind of limiting. The game does not look bad. It just does not look better than Three Houses. It does, however, look a lot more flashy. Like, really flashy. Basically, every engage form looks something out of some future sci-fi type movie. I'm not sure why they decided to go this route. It's really glowy and bright, and I don't have a better word besides flashy. And to accompany the flashiness of the looks, you also have a lot of flashy sounds. On a side note, I've said flashy way too many times in this review, and I apologize to everybody. Sound is solid. The music is great. Battle sounds are, I'd say, on par with where they need to be. They're not bad. There's nothing amazing about them. You hear a lot of metal clanging against each other and a lot of grunting when people are hit. Voices with this game aren't horrible.
Princess Ivy, speak for the Illusian throne. I will now take your lives, your souls, and the rings.
Cinematics are fully voiced, with decent dub voice actors this time around. They're still a little bit cringy, but it's bearable. I didn't have to change it back to Japanese this time, so I'd say it's an improvement. Overall, Fire Emblem Engage is definitely worth adding to your collection if you're a Fire Emblem or tactical RPG enthusiast. Engage isn't perfect, but its pros and its charm outweigh any negative. If you found this information helpful, be sure to give this video a thumbs up. Consider subscribing to the channel for more Fire Emblem videos and game reviews in the future. I'd like to thank you for making it this far into the video. I really do appreciate it. Be safe, be well, and I'll catch y'all next time. Peace!
I live to fight again.